as a peace-loving global citizen. Like a fireball burning hot. Chapter 2, Part 5. After graduating from the Kyongsong Institute in 1942, I traveled to Japan to continue my studies. I went because I felt that I needed to have exact knowledge about Japan. On the train to Busan, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. I covered myself with my coat and cried out loud. My nose ran and my face swelled up. I cried so much. It grieved me to think that I was leaving my country behind as it suffered under the yoke of colonial rule. I looked out the window as I wept, and I could see that the hills and rivers were weeping even more sorrowfully than I was. I saw with my own eyes the tears flowing from the grass and trees. Upon seeing this vision, I said, I promise to the hills and streams of my homeland that I will return, carrying with me the liberation of my homeland. So don't cry, but wait for me. I boarded the Busan to Shimonoseki ferry at 2 o'clock in the morning on April 1st. There was a strong wind that night, but I could not leave the deck. I stayed there watching as the lights of Busan became more and more distant. I stayed on deck until morning. On arriving in Tokyo, I entered Waseda Koto Kugakko, a technical engineering school affiliated with Waseda University. I studied in the electrical engineering department. I chose electrical engineering because I felt I could not establish a new religious philosophy without knowing modern engineering. The invisible world of mathematics has something in common with religion. To do something great, a person needs to excel in powers of reasoning. Perhaps because of my large head, I was good at mathematics that others found difficult, and I enjoyed studying it. My head was so large it was difficult for me to find hats that fit. I had to go to the factory twice to have a hat tailor-made for me. The size of my head may also have something to do with my ability to focus on something and finish relatively quickly what might take others several years to complete. During my studies in Japan, I peppered my teachers with questions, just as I had in Korea. Once I began asking questions, I would continue and continue. Some teachers would pretend not to see me and simply ignore me when I asked, "What do you think about this?" If I had any doubts about something, I couldn't be satisfied until I had pursued the matter all the way to the root. I wasn't deliberately trying to embarrass my teachers. I felt that, if I were going to study a subject, I should study it completely. On my desk in the boarding house, I always had 3 Bibles lying open side by side. One was in Korean, one in Japanese, and one in English. I would read the same passages in 3 languages again and again. Each time I read a passage, I would underline verses and make notes in the margins until the pages of my Bibles became stained with black ink and difficult to read. Soon after school began, I attended an event held by the Association of Korean Students to welcome new students from our country. There I sang a song from our homeland with great fervor, showing everyone my love for my country. The Japanese police were in attendance, and this was a time when Koreans were expected to assimilate themselves into Japanese culture. Nonetheless, I sang the Korean song with pride. Dong Moon Eom, who had entered the Department of Architectural Engineering that year, was deeply moved to hear me sing this song, and we became lifelong friends. During this time, Korean students who were enrolled in various schools in the Tokyo area had formed an underground independence movement. This was only natural, as our homeland was groaning in agony under Japanese colonial rule. The movement grew in response to what the Japanese called the Great East Asian War, 1937 to 1945. As the war intensified, Tokyo began conscripting Korean students as student soldiers and sending them to the front. The work of the underground independence movement was spurred on by such moves. We had extensive debates on what to do about Hirohito, the Japanese emperor. I took on a major position in the movement. It involved working in close relationship with the Republic of Korea Provisional Government, located in Shanghai and headed by Kim Gu. My responsibilities in this position could have required me to give up my life. I did not hesitate, though, because I felt that, if I died, it would have been for a righteous cause. There was a police station beside Waseda University. The Japanese police got wind of my work and kept a sharp eye on me. The police always knew when I was about to return home to Korea during school vacation and would follow me to the dock to make sure I left. I cannot even remember the number of times I was taken into custody by the police, beaten, tortured, and locked in a cell. Even under the worst torture, however, I refused to give them the information they sought. The more they beat me, the bolder I became. Once I had a fight on the Yatsugawa Bridge with police who were chasing me. I ripped out a piece of the bridge railing and used it as a weapon in the fight. In those days, I was a ball of fire. As a peace-loving global citizen. Befriending laborers by sharing their suffering. Chapter 2, Part 6. Just as I had done in Seoul, I made it a point to go everywhere in Tokyo. When my friends would go to places such as Nikko to see the beautiful scenery, I would prefer to stay behind and walk through all the neighborhoods of Tokyo. I found that it was a city that looked fancy on the outside but was actually filled with impoverished people. Again, I gave all the money that I received from home to the poor people. Back then everyone in Japan was hungry too. Among the Korean students there were many who were in financial difficulty. When I received my allotment of meal tickets each month, I would give them all away to students who couldn't afford them and told them, "Eat. Eat all you want." I didn't worry about earning money. I could go anywhere and work as a day laborer and be fed. I enjoyed earning money and using the money to help pay the tuition of students who didn't have money. Helping others and giving them food to eat filled me with energy. After I had given away all the money I had, I would work as a deliveryman using a bicycle-drawn cart. I went to every district of Tokyo with that cart. Once, in Ginza, with its dazzling lights, I was carrying a telephone pole on my cart and it turned over in the middle of an intersection. Everyone around ran for their lives. Because of these kinds of experiences, I still know the geography of Tokyo like the back of my hand. I was a laborer among laborers and a friend to laborers. Just like the laborers who smelled of sweat, I would go to the work sites and work until the sweat was pouring down my body. They were my brothers, and I didn't mind the terrible smells. I shared sleeping quilts with them that were so filthy that black lice crawled across them in a line formation. I didn't hesitate to grasp hands that were caked with dirt. Their sweat mixed with grime was filled with an irresistible warmth of heart. It was their warm hearts that I found so attractive. Primarily I worked as a laborer at the Kawasaki steel mill and shipyard. In the shipyard there were barges used to haul coal. We would form teams of 3 laborers each and work until 1 o'clock in the morning to fill a barge with 120 tons of coal. We Koreans could do in one night what it took the Japanese 3 days to accomplish. There were people at some work sites who extorted the blood and sweat of the laborers. Often these were the foremen who directly managed the laborers. They would take 30% of the money earned by the laborers they managed and keep it for themselves. The laborers were powerless to do anything about this. The foreman would exploit the weak but curry favor with those who were strong. I became so angry with one foreman that I finally went to him with 2 friends and demanded that he pay the workers their full wages. "If you make someone work, then pay him exactly what he is owed," I told him. He still refused, so we went to him a second day and even a third day. We were determined to keep up the pressure until he relented. Finally I kicked him and made him fall down. I am normally a quiet and passive person, but when I become angry the stubborn character of my younger years comes back. The Kawasaki steel mill had vats used to store sulfuric acid. Workers would clean these by going into them and making the raw material flow out. The fumes from the sulfuric acid were extremely toxic, and a person could not remain inside for more than 15 minutes. Even in such deplorable working conditions, the workers risked their lives in order to have food to eat. Food was that precious. I was always hungry. I was careful, though, to never eat a meal for my own sake. I felt there needed to be a specific reason for me to eat a particular meal. So as I would sit down to each meal I would ask myself the reasons for my hunger. Did I really work hard? Did I work for myself, or for a public purpose? I would face a bowl of rice and tell it, I am eating you so that I can do tasks that are more glorious and more for the public good than what I did yesterday. Then the rice would smile back at me with its approval. In those instances, the time spent eating a meal was mystical and joyful. When I didn't feel qualified to talk this way, I would skip the meal no matter how hungry I might be. As a result, there were not many days when I would have even 2 meals. I didn't limit myself to 2 meals a day because I had a small appetite. In fact, once I began to eat there was no limit to the amount I could consume. I once ate 11 large bowls of udon in one sitting. Another time I ate 7 bowls of a dish consisting of chicken and a fried egg over rice. Despite this appetite, I kept up my custom of not eating lunch and limiting myself to 2 meals a day until I was more than 30 years old. The sensation of hunger is a type of nostalgia. I knew very well about the nostalgia of hunger, but I believed it was the least I could do to sacrifice 1 meal a day for the sake of the world. I also never allowed myself to wear new clothes. No matter how cold it might get, I would not heat my room. When it was extremely cold, I used a newspaper to cover myself. It felt as warm as a quilt made of silk. I am very familiar with the value of a sheet of newspaper. At times I would simply go live for a while in an area of Shinagawa where poor people lived. I slept with them, using rags for cover. On warm sunny days I picked lice from their hair and ate rice with them. There were many prostitutes on the streets of Shinagawa. I would listen to them tell me about themselves, and I became their best friend without ever drinking a drop of liquor. Some people claim they need to be drunk in order to speak candidly about what is on their mind, but that is just an excuse. When these women realized that I was sincere in my sympathy for them, even without drinking any liquor, they opened their hearts to me and told me their troubles. I worked in many different jobs during my studies in Japan. I was a janitor in an office building. I wrote letters for illiterate people. I worked at various job sites and was a foreman. I was a fortune teller. When I needed money quickly, I wrote calligraphy and sold it. I never fell behind in my studies, however. I believe that all these things were part of my training process. I did all sorts of jobs and met all sorts of people. In the process I learned a lot about people. Because I had this experience, I can now take one look at a person and have a good idea of what the person does for a living and whether he is a good person. I don't have to weigh various thoughts in my head, because my body will tell me first. I still believe that to develop good character a person needs to experience many difficulties before turning 30. People need to go down into the crucible of despair at the bottom of human existence and experience what that is like. People need to discover new possibilities in the midst of hell. It is only when climbing out of the depths of despair and making a new determination that we can be reborn as people able to pioneer a new future. We should not look only in one direction. We should look at both those who are in a higher position and those lower. We should know to look east, west, south, and north. To live a successful life depends on how well we see with our mind's eye. To see well with the mind's eye, we must have many different experiences and remember them. Even in the most difficult situations, we should maintain our composure, demonstrate warmth toward others, be self-reliant, and adapt well to any circumstance. A person of good character must be accustomed to rising to a high position and then quickly falling to a low position. Most people are afraid of falling from a high position, so they do everything they can to preserve it. However, water that does not flow becomes stale. A person who rises to a high position must be able to go back down and wait for the time to come again. When the opportunity comes, he can rise to an even higher position than before. This is the type of person who can acquire a greatness that is admired by many people and is a great leader. These are the experiences that a person should have before turning 30. Today I tell young people to experience everything they can in the world. They need to directly or indirectly experience everything in the world, as if they were devouring an encyclopedia. It is only then that they can form their own identity. A person's self-identity is his clear subjective nature. Once a person has the confidence to say, "I can go all around the country. and I will never come across a person who is capable of defeating me, then he is ready to take on any task and have the confidence to accomplish it successfully. When a person lives life in this way, he will be successful. Success is assured. This is the conclusion I arrived at while living as a beggar in Tokyo. I shared meals and slept with laborers in Tokyo, shared the grief of hunger with beggars, learned the hard life, and earned my doctorate in the philosophy of suffering. Only then was I able to understand God's will as He works to bring salvation to humanity. It is important to become the king of suffering before age 30. The way to gain the glory of the kingdom of heaven is to become a king of suffering and earn your doctorate in that philosophy. As a peace-loving global citizen. The Calm Sea of the Heart. Chapter 2, Part 7. Japan's situation in the war became increasingly desperate. In the urgent need to replenish the shrinking ranks of its military, it began giving early graduation to students and sending them to the war front. For this reason, I, too, was graduated 6 months early. Once my graduation date was set for September 30, 1943, I sent a telegram to my family saying, "Will return on Kanran Maru," giving the name of the ship I was scheduled to board in Shimonoseki for Busan. However, on the day I was to leave Tokyo for the trip back to Korea, I had a strange experience in which my feet stuck to the ground, preventing me from moving. As hard as I tried, I could not pick my feet up off the ground to go to the train at the Tokyo station. I told myself, it must be that heaven doesn't want me to board that ship. So I decided to stay in Japan a while longer and went with my friends to climb Mount Fuji. When I returned to Tokyo a few days later, I found the country in an uproar over news that the Kanran Maru, the ship I was supposed to be on, had been sunk on its way to Busan. I was told that more than 500 university students had been killed. Kanran Maru was a large ship in which Japan took great pride, but it had been sunk by an American torpedo. When my mother heard the news that the ship her son was scheduled to board had been sunk, she immediately ran out of the house without even thinking to put on her shoes. She ran barefoot 5 miles to the train station and went directly to Busan. When she arrived at the Maritime Police Station in Busan, she discovered my name was not on the passenger manifest. The boarding house in Tokyo, however, told her that I had packed my bags and left. This put her in total confusion and agony. She just kept calling my name, not even realizing that she had large splinters in her bare feet. I can easily imagine how she must have been beside herself with worry that something might have happened to her son. I can understand my mother's heart, but from the day I chose to follow God's path I became a terrible son to her. I couldn't afford to let myself be tied down by personal emotions. So I had not sent word that I had not boarded the ship that had been sunk, even though I knew she would be deeply concerned for my safety. Upon finally returning to Korea, I found nothing had changed. Japan's tyrannical rule was becoming worse by the day. The entire land was soaked in blood and tears. I returned to Heuksok-dong in Seoul and attended the Myung Church. I kept detailed diaries of all the new realizations that I had each day. On days when I had a great number of such realizations, I would fill an entire diary. I was receiving answers to many of the questions that I had struggled with over the years. It was as if my years of prayers and search for truth were being answered. It happened in a short time, as if a ball of fire were passing through me. During this time I had the realization, the relationship between God and mankind is that of a father and his children, and God is deeply saddened to see their suffering. In this moment all the secrets of the universe were resolved in my mind. Suddenly, it was as if someone had turned on a movie projector. Everything that had happened since the time humankind broke God's commandment played out clearly before my eyes. Hot tears flowed continuously from my eyes. I fell to my knees and bowed my head to the floor. For the longest time I couldn't get up. Just as when my father had carried me home on his back as a child, I laid my body down in God's lap and let the tears flow. 9 years after my encounter with Jesus, My eyes had finally been opened to the true love of God. God created Adam and Eve and sent them into this world to be fruitful, to multiply, and to bring about a world of peace where they would live. But they could not wait for God's time. They committed fornication and bore 2 sons, Cain and Abel. The children who were born from the fall did not trust each other and brought about an incident where one brother murdered the other. The peace of this world was shattered, sin covered the world, and God's sorrow began. Then humankind committed another terrible sin by killing Jesus, the Messiah. So the suffering that humanity experiences today is a process of atonement that it must pass through as God's sorrow continues. Jesus had appeared to me as a boy of 16 because he wanted me to know the root of the original sin that humankind had committed and to bring about a world of peace where sin and the fall would no longer exist. I had received God's serious word to atone for the sins of humanity and bring about the world of peace that God had originally created. The world of peace that is God's desire is not someplace we go to after death. God wants this world, where we live now, to be the completely peaceful and happy world that He created in the beginning. God certainly did not send Adam and Eve into the world for them to suffer. I had to let the world know this incredible truth. Having discovered the secrets of the creation of the universe, I felt my heart become like a calm ocean. My heart was filled with the Word of God. It felt as though it might explode, and my face was always shining with joy. As a peace-loving global citizen. Please don't die. Chapter 2, Part 8. I continued to devote myself to prayer, and I came to feel intuitively that the time had come for me to marry. Because I had decided to follow God's path, everything about my life had to be done in accordance with God's will. Once I came to know something through prayer, I had no choice but to follow. So I went to one of my aunts who had much experience in arranging marriages and asked her to introduce me to a suitable wife. This is how I met Seon Gil Choi, the daughter of a prominent Christian family in Yeongju. She was a well-raised woman from an upright family. She had attended only elementary school, but she had a character that disliked having to cause even the slightest trouble to others. Her character was so strong and her Christian faith so deep that she had been imprisoned at age 16 for refusing to comply with the Japanese colonial requirement that all Koreans worship at Shinto shrines. I was told that I was the 24th man to be considered as her groom, so it seemed she was very selective about whom she would marry. Once I returned to Seoul, however, I completely forgot I had even met the woman. My plan after completing my studies in Japan had been to travel to Hailar, China, a city on the border between China, Russia, and Mongolia. My school in Tokyo had arranged a job for me with the Manchuria Electric Company, and my plan was to work in Hailar for about 3 years while learning Russian, Chinese, and Mongolian. Just as I had earlier sought out a school that would teach me Japanese so that I could win over the Japanese, I wanted to go to this border city and learn a number of foreign languages as a way of preparing myself for the future. It was becoming increasingly clear, however, that Japan was heading for defeat in the war. I decided that it would be better for me not to go to Manchuria. So I stopped by a branch office of the Manchuria Electric Company in Andong, present-day Dandong, and submitted paperwork to cancel my job placement. I then headed for my hometown. When I arrived, I found that the aunt whom I had asked to arrange my marriage was in great distress. Apparently, the woman I had met was refusing to consider anyone other than me as her partner and was causing great trouble for her family. My aunt took me by the arm and led me to the Choi family home. I explained to Seon Gil Choi clearly about the kind of life I intended to lead. Even if we marry now, you should be prepared to live without me for at least 7 years, I told her. Why should I do that? She responded. I told her, I have a task that is more important than family life. In fact, my reason for getting married has to do with my ability to carry out God's providence. Our marriage needs to develop beyond the family to the point where we can love the nation and all humanity. Now that you know that this is my intention, do you truly want to marry me? She responded with a firm voice, "It doesn't matter to me. After I met you, I dreamed of a field of flowers in the moonlight. I am certain that you are my spouse sent from heaven. I can endure any difficulty." I was still concerned, and I pressed her several times. Each time she sought to set my mind at ease, saying, "I am willing to do anything, as long as I am able to marry you. Don't worry about anything." My future father-in-law passed away a week before our scheduled wedding date, so our wedding was delayed. We were finally able to hold our ceremony on May 4, 1944. Normally May is a time for beautiful spring days, but on our wedding day it rained heavily. Reverend Ho Bin Lee of the Jesus Church officiated. Later, after Korea's liberation from Japan, Reverend Lee would go to South Korea and establish an ecumenical seminary called the Yungang Seminary. My wife and I began our married life in my boarding room in Hyuksok-dong. I truly loved her and took such good care of her that the mistress of the boarding house would say, "Oh my, you must really love her, since you treat her as if you were handling an egg." I got a job at the Gyeongsang branch of the Kashima Gumi Construction Company in Yongsan in order to support our family while I also carried out church work. Then, one day in October, the Japanese police suddenly stormed into our home. "Do you know so-and-so of Waseda University?" they demanded. Without even giving me a chance to reply, they pulled me out of the house and took me to the Gyeonggi Province Police Station. I was being detained because one of my friends had been arrested for being a communist and had mentioned my name to his interrogators. Once inside the police station, I was immediately subjected to torture. "You're a member of the Communist Party, aren't you? Weren't you working with that rascal while you were studying in Japan? Don't even bother trying to deny it. All we have to do is put in a call to Tokyo Police Headquarters and they will tell us everything. You can give us the list of party members or die like a dog." They beat me with a table and broke all four of its legs against my body, but I refused to give them the names of the people who had worked with me in Japan. The Japanese police then went to where I was living with my wife, turned it upside down, and discovered my diaries. They brought the diaries to me and went through them page by page, demanding I tell them about the names they found. I denied everything, even though I knew they might kill me for my silence. The police stomped on me mercilessly with their spiked military boots until my body was as limp as if I were dead. Then they hung me from the ceiling and swung me back and forth. Like a slab of meat hanging in a butcher shop, I swung this way and that as they pushed me with a stick. Soon, blood filled my mouth and began dripping onto the cement floor below me. Each time I lost consciousness, they would pour a bucket of water over me. When I regained consciousness, the torture would begin again. They held my nose and stuck the spout of a tea kettle into my mouth, forcing me to swallow water. When my stomach became bloated with water, they laid me face up on the floor, looking like a frog, and began stomping on my abdomen with their military boots. The water would be forced up my esophagus and I would vomit until everything turned black. On the days after I had been tortured this way, my esophagus felt as though it was on fire. The pain was so great I could not bear to swallow a single mouthful of soup. I had no energy and would just lie face down on the floor, completely unable to move. The war was coming to an end, and the Japanese police were desperate. They tortured me in ways words cannot describe. I endured, though, and never gave them the names of any of my friends. Even as I was going in and out of consciousness, I made sure not to give them what they wanted. Finally, tiring of torturing me, the Japanese police sent for my mother. When she arrived, my legs were so swollen that I couldn't stand on my own. 2 policemen had to put my arms over their shoulders and help me walk to the visiting room. My mother had tears in her eyes even before she set eyes on me. "Endure just a little longer," she said. "Mother will somehow get you a lawyer. Please endure, and don't die before then." My mother saw how my face was covered with blood, and she pleaded with me. "It doesn't matter how much good you are trying to do," she said. "It's more important that you keep yourself alive. No matter what happens, don't die." I felt sorry for her. I would have liked to call out, "Mother," embrace her, and cry out loud with her. I couldn't do that, though, because I knew perfectly well why the Japanese police had brought her there. My mother kept pleading with me not to die, but all I could do in return was blink my badly swollen and bloodied eyes. During the time I was held in the Gyeonggi Province Police Station, it was Mrs. Gi Bong Lee, the mistress of the boarding house, who kept me supplied with food and clothing. She wept every time she visited me. I would comfort her, saying, "Endure a little longer. This era is coming to an end. Japan will be defeated soon. You don't need to cry." These were not empty words. God had given me this belief. As soon as the police released me in February of the following year, I took all my diaries that had been stacked in the boarding house to the bank of the Han River. There I burned them so they would not cause any further trouble to my friends. If I had not done this, I knew the diaries could eventually be used by the police to harm others. My body did not recover easily from the torture. I had blood in my feces for quite a while. Mrs. Lee, the boarding house mistress, and her sister helped me to nurse my body back to health with great sincerity and dedication. Finally, on August 15, 1945, Korea was liberated from Japan. This was the day every Korean had been waiting for. It was a day of tremendous emotion. Shouts of Manse and people waving the Taeguk flag covered the entire peninsula. I could not join in the festivities, however. My heart was deadly serious because I could foresee the terrible calamity that was about to befall the Korean peninsula. I went alone into a small anteroom and immersed myself in prayer. Soon after that, my fears were realized. Although liberated from Japanese rule, our homeland was cut in two at the 38th parallel. In the north, a communist regime that denied the existence of God came to power.